Yesterday, we started talking about what happened to the IEBC over the weekend. They uploaded data from the 2017 general election, and then there were serious errors on that data, and they immediately pulled down that information. And we were in a bit of a disagreement on how to read this whole fiasco. I was coming from a point where I was thinking there's absolutely no way that I'd buy that it's possible for you to tell me somebody, a candidate, somebody called Mercy Korir, who works for Standard Group, can suddenly appear on some paper indicating that Mercy Korir works for Mombasa Cement Company and is not even a doctor. I just cannot understand. When that data in physical hard form shows that Mercy Korir works for Standard Group, how can the same Mercy Korir, same ID number, same parents, same village, same birth certificate number be now a clinker operator at Mombasa Cement? How is that possible? All right. And I was just raising those questions. And then one of the people who was listening in was the former IEBC CEO, Ezra Chiloba. And now we'd like to reach out to him and speak to him because, first of all, we'd like to understand this data that was being uploaded on the internet, on their website, the IEBC, over the weekend. What kind of data is it? And is it the first time that they're uploading this kind of data? How do they collect this data? How do they store this data during all this period? How do they even deal with the data in terms of reading the data? How does the IEBC make use of the data that they collect? Because as long as you're registering as voters and you're going to participate in an election, there's a lot of data that's being captured countrywide. What does that mean? Ezra Chiloba, good morning.
Good morning, Eric.
Welcome to the Situation Room.
Thank you very much. I actually didn't know you exist. I told you that yesterday.
Welcome to the room. This room is not as hot as the one you left at the IEBC.
We'll see.
But it's a few degrees less hot, but it's still hot. Now, listen, you were there at the IEBC. First of all, where are you? Are you Nairobi? Are you in Kenya? You know, IEBC people now, we no longer know where they are.
I'm no longer IEBC. So I used to be. It's been over 2 years since I left, I think.
Yep.
At the moment, for the last about 60 days, I've been in Kitale, the best place to be at the moment, as we monitor the development around COVID-19 and many other things.
So this is what they call deep quarantine.
There's a bit of freedom. It's not the cell-like type that you guys are experiencing in Nairobi skyscrapers and stuff like that. At least it's fresh air out here.
True. So now let's talk about the 2017 general election. A lot of hue and cry. The matter of the presidential election went into petition. And then there was a standoff and many disagreements, the calls for you and your chairman to leave, you and your chairman not seeing eye to eye on some issues, some IEBC commissioners leaving or saying that they had not left, but then they have left again. But then let's even set that aside and look at the data. There was a lot of information that was collected by IEBC. The election that you conducted in 2017 was mainly electronic in terms of transmission of the data, and therefore also we assume storage of that data. And then data is uploaded onto the IEBC website, and it shows completely different things from the situation on the ground as we speak.
Yeah, I had the privilege to look at the report that was uploaded, and then removed from the website. One, I have to mention that if you look at the history of election data in this country, perhaps there's no any other year that we have rich data on elections like the 2017 election. The commission, I think, has results from for presidential election, all the seats, and the results are not just at that top level. you should be able to access the results all the way to the polling station.
Mm-hmm.
And I've looked at the data, historical data. Nowhere will you find data like that other than on the 2017 election. So it's rich data available, but the only challenge is how you make use of such a data, especially if you want to get insights into elections in Kenya.
Mm.
So what I saw being published was, I think, an attempt to make sense of that data, which means, of course, one is supposed to understand what that data basically means.
Mm.
And if you're communicating to the public, the question is, what is it that you're trying to communicate? Unfortunately, I think in the process of trying to make that sense from the large data that the Commission has, somehow things didn't go right for them.
Looking at the raw data, like you're saying, it's very rich data, and what you had in 2017 is different from what you've had previously. Even just looking at the between 2017 and 4 years earlier, 2013. What new information do you have, for example, in the presidential election that was not captured in 2013?
In terms of how to, the first thing would be, you look at the 2013 data that was made public, it focused on presidential results at the constituency level.
Mm-hmm.
You will not find information of the polling station results, largely because it was paper-based.
Okay.
And the results were left at the constituency offices. But for the 2017 election, the fact that we use the KIM system, you find that you can drill down the presidential results all the way to the polling station, the 40,000 plus polling station. And that data is available. It's not just for the presidential election. All the seats, including the MCS.
Yeah.
And I'll say you'll get 98% of that data in soft version.
Mm-hmm.
And that's available. That's why I call it rich data.
So basically, it's information that can tell you in a particular polling station, this is how a particular candidate fared. If a candidate wanted to look at this, they can even use this information to know how they're doing to prepare for the next election.
Very well said.
And it will, of course, now take it down from presidential all the way to the ward rep, the MCA position. So if this information is already in soft copy, and I'm assuming that when you're playing around, when you're working with this information and you want to now break it down into how you want to present it to the people, you'll grab information from this column or from this side and put it together so that it makes sense. How possible then is it for Millie Odhiambo to appear in a different political party in a different constituency, for example?
Well, I mean, if you're not careful when you're dealing with the sensitive data, you're likely going to make mistakes. If you're going to do it manually, it means that then your quality assurance system must be so robust so that you avoid some of those mistakes. It happens when you're dealing with huge data. But I think the idea when we were setting up the system then was for you to, as much as possible, avail this information in a format that is easy to access and do your own independent analysis.
Yep.
I will not try to transfer the data that is from 40,000 polling stations into a 700-page document in PDF to try to make it public. That is difficult. You can't do that. I think using an online platform perhaps would have been easier.
Yeah.
So that someone like Eric, you can go there and use a query system that will allow you to be able to drill down what exactly the type of data you're looking for. So try to make it manual, translating from a digital format into paper-based format using huge data, you're going to make mistakes.
And that sounds a bit obvious. I mean, you already have a platform. You already have this platform called the IEBC.co.ke was the one that we were using to look at for results in 2017. You could go in and query to specific constituency, specific polling station, and you see the results then. So why not use the same to post the data? Why try and break it down into 700 pages of a PDF?
I mean, they could be having a reason as to why they did that, but I don't think the best way to do it. It's not the most efficient. It's not the most useful. I think what they need to do is to have just a summarized, maybe 20 pages of insight of what they derive from the data, and make the rest available online for anyone else to access. But trying to transport data, I think they're going to make mistakes.
So, as we're looking at 2017 at that point, and then 2018, assuming that there was a time frame that would have been given to share this information, was this done then?
No,
this easier format of information dissemination, was it done at that time?
Oh, the information is available. I think the only challenge that the Commission faced is that immediately after the election, we got into other internal issues that kind of distracted the institution from focusing what was more important. Yeah, so I think all these last few years, if you look at what has been happening, I think we basically got ourselves as a country in a situation that we cannot get ourselves out immediately. Otherwise, this report ought to have been out as early as 6 months after the election.
So the reason why this information then was not made available to Kenyans at the time when it should have been was because of the internal wrangles that we saw taking place. Internal, external, however you want to look at it. The reason why this information was not shared at that time was because of this.
I mean, that from where I sit, that could explain why, because I understand a little bit of how the institution works. I think at some point there was a lot of fear. No one wants to take any decision on anything.
Yeah.
A lot of inquiries being undertaken by, parliamentary committees. The commission itself trying to carry out its own internal investigations. People resigning. So the environment kind of changed. So people got into this mode of, I want to survive. So they were not focused on what they were supposed to do.
So people were not working. People were basically on survival mode.
Exactly.
Everybody looking over their backs. Who's got a dagger?
Exactly. That's my view.
Oh, my goodness. Oh, my. Let's look at that data. The data that you saw before you left the commission, the data that you saw coming in. And I would imagine that would also give a picture of how our electoral system works, the kind of challenges and wins that we have in our electoral system. What were you able to glean out of it, just, casually speaking?
Okay. First of all, I think I should also mention that since I left 2 years ago, I've been trying to work with some few individuals to put together historical data on elections since 1945 and try to see if we can make it available to the public. Working with some team called the Kenya Election Database and data science. So in the process, of course, we've looked at the 2017 election based on the information that was posted online before this. And you discover that our electoral system perhaps contributes a lot to the issues around trust and in the electoral process generally. And when we look, for example, at the National Assembly representation, you got 15 million people who went to the polling station to vote. And out of those who voted, only 8.5 million seats count. 8.5 million votes counted for something. That is, turned those votes into seats.
Okay.
6.5 million guys voted, went home, and they did not see any impact at all in Parliament. Then you find that out of 65 contesting political parties, only 21 got represented in the National Assembly. And even more interesting is that some political parties that won as little as 67,000 votes have 4 seats in the National Assembly, while other political parties with an equal number of votes, or even much more, have only 1 seat or no seat at all. So people kind of, when you get such a situation, is that people kind of get disillusioned. It's a process.
Yeah.
They go to vote, but when they go back home, they find that their vote is not.
It didn't
count
matter.
for anything.
Yeah.
It didn't matter at all. And even more interesting, you'll find that the people who are actually in parliament, who were elected by less than 30%
Yeah.
of people who went to vote.
Yeah.
So, in fact, in MCA is a worse off situation. We have guys who were elected by 16% of the votes that were cast, which means 84%
Are not
of
represented.
people voted, they are not represented. So you find this disillusionment, discontent, and mistrust of the electoral process, partly because of such outcomes. Just because of our electoral system.
So what I hear you say is basically, if you just translate it directly, out of 15 million people who went to cast their votes for an MP,
Yes.
only 8 million of those votes translated to an MP actually getting into parliament. So
Exactly.
basically, close to half of the people who went to vote for MP did not get their candidate elected.
Exactly.
Close to half feel that the person who is in office right now does not represent them.
You got it right.
And therefore, this means that
And
close
even
to
more
half
interesting-
of those people feel that IEBC, the election was stolen or was manipulated or was interfered with in one way or the other.
Exactly.
All right.
Isn't that the nature of a democracy? That the majority, 50% plus 1, will have their way, and you as a minority, the rest, you had your say, you had your chance. You should have mobilized some more.
But now here, see, if just before you come in, Ezra, he's just given us the example of the MCAs. In some cases, only 17% have their MCA in office. The
Yeah,
other
exactly.
83%, which is the majority, are not represented. The person who's in office is not the person that they have chosen.
But how come then?
Exactly.
Many candidates. We have 40 candidates in a
Yeah,
contesting
exactly.
a seat.
It's democracy.
How
It's democracy.
Everybody's running around the circus trying to get a piece of the pie, and then that's what democracy means in this
Yeah.
case. And so somebody's bound to be upset, and somebody is bound to come out the victor. I don't think it has anything to. At some point,
But
if you look at it,
should the
it's not-
majority be upset?
But-
Those are the question that I think we should be asking. If 87% are feeling, look, yes, we have 40 candidates, yes, but this person who has won has only gotten 10% of the vote of everybody else, maybe that's why we should be calling for runoffs everywhere.
No, but you should have done your pre-election processes better.
How?
But-
Bring parties together if you need to, ask some people to support others. I don't know, find a way of making sure that that's the nature of democracy, that your best candidate is the one that most of you will support, so that you minimize all these conflicts that are out here. It's democracy.
You start locking out candidates? Issues. Ezra, come in.
Yeah, I think, that is exactly the debate that we need to be having. What is the reason of us having the type of electoral system that we have? If after every election we have complaints, if after every election, of course, people complain about rigging and stuff like that, what is really the problem? And I think in a democracy, what we always say is that a good electoral system should be one that enhances what we call the equality of the vote. One person, one vote. Is one that in a society like ours that gives us fair representation. It must be inclusive, and it must be realistic, looking at the political realities of the day. In our country, ethnicity is core. So if you design an electoral system that is not consistent with these values, then you're going to have a lot of discontent, in as much as you call it democracy.
the IEBC.
And my take is that there's only so much that the Commission can do. The IEBC's responsibility is to implement the electoral system. But then political parties have to be organized in such a way that whatever outcome comes out is reflective also of the majority, of the will of the majority.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Okay. The IEBC in this country seems to have a taint on its image from time immemorial. And unfortunately, or however you choose to look at it, the person sitting at the helm of the IEBC at any one time during an election obviously walked away with some of that responsibility on his shoulders. It's always been men in this case, so we'll say his. You also bore the brunt of a lot of those attacks. Why do you think this was?
I don't know.
Really? You can be honest. The situation won't kick you out for being honest.
No, I mean, exactly the same. I've spent two years outside, the political space, and I've been asking myself, reflecting on why things end up the way they end up. And I can say I don't want to pretend that I know the answer. So, and the reason I took up this idea of trying to analyze data and look at the patterns of voting and why there's a lot of discontent in a society like ours. So I think that this goes beyond the IEBC, and it's much more to do with how our society works and how our politics work. And there's a lot of mystery around the IEBC. Some people think it's a very powerful organization, while it's not. Or maybe it is. So there's a lot of these perceptive things. I, as an individual, when I walk in the street, so busy on the farm and I meet people, they tell me stories about elections and I wonder where they get all these things from. So there's a perception that's been created around the institution that's not necessarily true. And I think becomes an easier way of explaining a lot of failed institutional architecture and processes of our elections across the board.
Well, one of those narratives, Ezra, is that the results of an election were bungled under your watch, right? I mean, that's one of the things that's out there. It's public perception. It's a narrative that is still being strung by quite a number of people. Now, here you are on the periphery of it all now and saying that you're not really sure what may have happened. How is a country supposed to move away from this, whereby every time there was an election, there was always an issue around the IEBC and the individual who sat at the position where things were supposed to have been moved or shaken? How do we get people away from that, to divorce them from that when something goes wrong during an election in Kenya, the IEBC is at the heart of it all, every single time?
I mean, my thoughts would be like, we have to have a honest reflection on our entire electoral system. The trouble I've seen is that it has always been reactive, and then it's short-termist. We don't look at the long-term consequences of the decisions that we make today. I was in the commission for only 3 years. I think I got there when it was about 28 or so months to the election. And we were having the same situation as it is now. Suspense and uncertainty about the future. And, went there with the idea that we're going to reform, course change, and get ready for the election. We did what we could. But before long, of course, there was a lot of changes that happened in between. And that affected the manner in which we also got, in which we prepared for the election. And I mean, a lot might be said, but there's a lot of very competent people in that organization. And what they need is to facilitate them to be able to deliver better. But what has happened is that after every election, we descend with the institution, we cause unnecessary fear, and in that situation, you cannot really perform well.
Nobody's going to move.
No, so we're not having a honest conversation about how we can build credible institutions.
Are we willing to have an honest conversation? I'm taking you where I always sit, and where I sit is, as long as politicians have control of this process or in the driver's seat, they're not willing to have an honest conversation. We must have somebody to blame for my loss.
Unfortunately, you cannot do away with it. They have stakes in this.
Reduce their stake.
So-
Don't do away with them.
Yeah, I mean, the thing is that you cannot have a commission without the intervention of the political parties, which is basically parliament,
Yep.
through parliament
Yep.
or through the executive. We must strengthen our institution, but since they have a stake, they want to play a role. They're expected to play a role. But the question is, are we basing our decision based on information that is reliable and one that can inform a long-term, give us a long-term solution to the issues that we face?
With all
So
of this,
that's what we don't have.
does the vote count for Kenyans? Because we talk about the representation thereafter when you see results, and then people may not be happy. And the question is that many people are asking themselves now that we're rallying around something. And again, a narrative, whether it's spun in the imaginations of people's minds or otherwise, is that your vote at the end of the day doesn't count. And then you have voter apathy. So does the vote matter right now for people to see their desired leader in a position of government
As
or
things
leadership?
stand.
As things stand today, does it count?
No, I think, it's a question that we need to pose to everyone. I think a vote counts if, for example, those who are elected are able to do what the voters expect them to do. And it's something that then they have to be held to account at the next election. So I cannot really answer that now. But in terms of the process, if somebody goes to the polling station and votes, and his vote does not, or his or her vote does not turn out to be meaningful in terms of representation, we must query that.
Okay,
We've
let's
always-
query it now, Ezra.
So
let's
how
query
do we
it now.
make it meaningful?
Let's take it 2 years back,
Yeah.
for example, and people went to the ballot and they put down their vote for whatever they wanted to do. 3 years back now, 2017. At that point, when you were in that position, were you expectant that Kenyans would now birth the results of their vote and say, yes, the leader that I have chosen is the person who is in government or is in parliament or wherever they are? At that point, from where you were sitting, did the vote of the Kenyan matter? Did it
In terms
count
of process,
for you?
In terms of process, actually did. It did. There's been a lot of discussion and noise about what went wrong, what went right.
Yeah.
I think the idea that the fact that the presidential election of August 8 was nullified kind of clouded all the other processes. If you look at the data in IEBC, for example, when people went to court to challenge the election based on what had happened at the presidential election, out of 300 petitions, the commission won all of them except 2, I think. So you can see that from the evidence available, I think we did a very good job at the time. So that counts for something. Now, the question is whether there are lessons we learn from that process going into the future so that we make electoral outcomes more acceptable. So that is where the challenge is. And the commission, yes, yeah.
In your own post-mortem analysis of that situation, you said there are many conversations about what went right, what went wrong. In your own analysis, having been there in the thick of things, what went wrong?
My take has been that it was beyond the technical aspects of the election management. I think largely we underestimated the impact or the social aspects of the election. We underestimated the impact of the political players. And what we could have improved perhaps is trying to engage more with political parties so that we have a common understanding of what the election entails. And by the way, this goes all the way to the Supreme Court. We always say that had we had a better relationship in terms of explaining the electoral process with other critical stakeholders, including the judiciary, for example, the use of ICT, we would have had a slightly different outcome. But seemingly we ran on our own other institutions ran on their own, and in between there was political pressure in terms of, not to defend the pro, but political pressure in the sense that a lot more demand from political players, and that kind of clouded us from not appreciating those social challenges. And I think even in future, unless we have a mechanism that allows these groups to vent properly and accept the process, we are likely just going to go back at the same situation.
So the issue is about trust and mistrust of the commission.
Yeah.
How do we build trust for not just the commission, but our entire electoral process from the very beginning to the end? Even now, 25 months into the next general election, do we trust the process? Do we trust that, from the very beginning, from registering as a voter to changing your polling station to identifying a polling, do we trust that process? And what is it that can be done to change this and what we have in the country? 26 minutes to 10 o'clock. On the line with us is Ezra Chiloba, former Chief Executive Officer of the Independent Electoral and Boundaries Commission. We are discussing the 2017 general election and all the previous elections, and the hot topic now emerging again, electoral reforms in the country. We are taking an audit of what happened in the 2017 election, the lessons that we take from that, and what we need to do going forward. Ezra, before we went to the break, you asked by Dr. Marcy what went wrong. And he said you seemed to have focused a lot on the technical side of things and you forgot the other side of things, which is the soft side of things, which brings in the issue of trust and mistrust of our electoral process. And you've even alluded to that yourself by when earlier you had talked about if people don't feel like they trust the system, then it doesn't matter. Even if 90% people vote for one candidate, the other 10% will still feel like they lost. What is it? What's the cause of this deep mistrust to the system?
Well, I think it's about what people take election to mean for them. Our elections generally, if we look at it, is the ethnic best when it comes to representation. So losing means the whole community loses. And the fact also that they tend to associate development to winning an election. So that sense that they've lost. So basically they've lost the development opportunity. Contributes to that. But also it's the way the players, for example, the candidates, conduct themselves in the election. They promise perhaps what they cannot deliver. And sometimes they look for the shortest route, which is to exploit the vulnerabilities of people. And when they go to the ballot, they lose. People are left wondering what next. Yeah. So a little bit of the conduct of the political players themselves, a little bit of the nature of our political or the political process, ethnic best, and this expectation that winning is about development, and we have this attitude of winner take all. I would rather win and the other guy loses. I think we need to get to a place whereby we build a society that appreciates everyone being around the table. And that's why we have to revisit our electoral system at some point in the future.
What drives this expectation, though? What is it that makes people expect that this is what I'm going to get when I participate in an election? It can't be that this is our education system. 844 has not made us believe that if I vote for somebody of my tribe, I'm going to get the goodies. What exactly is it that has driven us to this point?
Maybe Dr. Massey should tell us. I assume that a political scientist. He should tell us why our society behaves the way it behaves. And there's a historical pattern towards it. I once read an article by a guy called Joel Bakan. He talks about agrarian societies, why people vote for their MPs. They do not vote for their MPs for purposes of legislation, oversight, and those kind of things. In agrarian societies, where basically rural-based communities, people look at development from pipe water, they want to see schools. So they vote for these people to bring those things to them. So the role of the legislature is no longer, historically has not been legislation and oversight, but rather development.
It's bringing development to
that kind of has been embedded into our system, and we need to get to a point where perhaps we need to overcome that. But that's really our history, based on some scholarly work done by some people. But I really do not understand why we have not been able to break from that, even under new constitutional dispensation.
But something that you have the laws are in place, and the IEBC has been given the mandate, is to control the conduct of the candidates during campaigns. Why is this so hard to put in check when candidates go around the country? And our colleague Siti Muga keeps talking about this all the time. A politician will come and promise you the moon, and you have absolutely nothing to hold them to account them on. I mean, what? But IEBC has got the power somehow to ensure that these candidates are conducting themselves in a different way. Why is it so hard for IEBC to do this?
No, I think Eric, that is giving IEBC too much credit and and power that it does not have. IEBC is not responsible for political accountability of candidates. Candidates are accountable to their electors. So if you choose to elect someone, then the only way to hold them to account is either to use the recall clauses in the law or in the next election.
Ezra, I'd like to look at it, sorry to butt in, but I'd like to look at it from this point where IEBC is responsible for vetting candidates and allowing, giving clearance for them to vie. But here we have cases, many, of where candidates, some, as people would make jokes about, they cannot even be the chairman of their local cattle dips, are given a go-ahead by IEBC. Some have cases that have tainted images, yet they get clearance, you can vie. For me, that is the first point where IEBC can make sure that the quality of candidates who the electorate has to pick from then is good, and not people who at the end of the day will come and promise a lot of air and then dupe the electorate into something else.
No, I think also that there has been a misapplication of that provision of law where we're supposed to vet and clear candidates. The vetting process, from our understanding, was that it was multi-institutional. You need to clear by different agencies, ESCC, KRA, HELB, and many other institutions. So when these candidates bring their documents to IEBC, they will bring all those documents. And since we receive these documents as confirmation that these people are fit to run, we execute that. And of course, there's another bit about it. If somebody is in court, is been persecuted but not convicted, the practice has been that you do not deny that person a chance unless they've been convicted for that offense. And that, I think, the principle of the rules of natural justice. So that is where we actually differ from other stakeholders' views. People want to see that once you're negatively mentioned out there, IEBC has to step in to deny you an opportunity to run. I think that leads us to more subjective vetting process, which is also biased and perhaps not good for the institution.
And then that's where the responsibility of the voter comes in. I mean, if you believe that this person, you could not have elected this person to be the chairman of a cattle dip, why are you electing them to be MCA or councillor or senator or woman rep, governor or president? But then we like I always think, we like passing on the blame to this one institution or to somebody else. As long as we can point to someone else and say, you are the one who's failed me for my poor decision making. It's human nature.
It's human nature. You always have to point a finger somewhere. You have to find somebody to blame or to cast to blame for all your shortfalls things. But you see, we have an electorate, different kinds. They're literate. We are varied forms of people, and our institutions, in my opinion, should be able to safeguard, and as I always say, should be able to safeguard the most vulnerable, those that are not able to make their own independent choices. And if it means, even if it's being subjective or delaying, I don't know, there has to be something. There has to be something that can be done to protect the most vulnerable
in the society.
Exactly.
How would we do this?
The only way to do that is to have an objective criteria. Never ever trust the human mind when it's making judgment, because it's biased. So you as an arbiter, you have to just stick to the rules that try to accommodate everyone. So the assumption we make is that law is the equalizer. So if you leave it to the human mind is very deceptive and cunning, so you don't want to get there.
Ezra,
that's why if you come to the institution like the IEBC, some of those officers, you hear about them or you see them. When you meet them in person, you wonder. They're just simple individuals who are dedicated to their job.
He's a good guy.
He
he can buy a drink.
Exactly. So my take is that we look at an objective criteria that allows us to run our institution much better. That's the critical factor.
Let's talk about electoral reforms now. March talked about, and now I'm going to play you some reggae again. BBI has some of the recommendations on what we need to do for electoral reforms. Among them is, first, let's reconstitute the IEBC, and then others. There has been talk of looking at the voting system, going into proportional representation, where you're talking about political parties now campaigning for political parties, and the party that gets the vote, or whatever kind of proportional representation is adopted. But at least it says that every vote at this point will count. It will have some weight. There are those that have also argued for weighted voting, where some people's vote carries more weight than others. Yeah, so let's start with proportional representation. From what I heard you talking about looking at a constituency and seeing very many people who voted and their vote didn't count. What's your view on this?
Well, I'm a proponent of proportional representation when it comes to parliamentary representation. And the reason is that when you read a lot of literature about how societies craft political institutions to ensure there is political stability and cohesion, a lot of these societies that look like ours, which is basically multi-ethnic, high levels of polarization, and high risk when it comes to conflict, they adopt systems that are more proportional as opposed to our case. If you look at Boma's process, there was a proposal to actually move our electoral system from what we call the first past the post to mixed member proportional representation. But that was abandoned. And the explanation the committee gave? Let's go for what we are used to.
Yep.
That is what is written in that particular report, without giving a deeper reflection of the implication of that decision.
Of what we're used to.
Exactly. So if you look at the proportional representation, in simple terms, it basically means seats in the parliament should be allocated to political parties based on the strength of their votes across the country or their region. And if you do that, for example, we look at the 2017 election, and we try to build scenarios in terms of what it will mean if, for example, the total number of votes cast were redistributed to achieve proportional representation.
Yeah.
And it was interesting to observe that if we redistribute the seats proportionate to the seats at the national level, we'll get 99% equal representation. And if we scale it down and say, let's do proportional representation at the county level, you find that from the 6 million votes, 6.5 million votes that I mentioned earlier that do not have representation, that number is reduced down to 1.2 million votes or thereabouts, which means it's a more equal system.
Yeah.
It's more proportionate system. And that is how societies that are polarized actually harness the power of proportional representation to achieve stability.
Just explain this practically. If we were to look at proportional representation, if we went into 2017 with a mixed member proportional representation method, how would I as a voter have participated in this?
Well, it also depends on the type of proportional representation, but simply it means that instead of going to vote for a specific candidate, you vote for a political party.
Okay.
So you assume that the political party is a strong institution that is able to mobilize and organize and able to recruit candidates who will make the political party attractive. So you vote for the political party, and then at the end of the voting, when we count results, we determine a number we call a quota. Basically, we take the number of seats available, divide by the number of votes that have been cast, and start allocating seats based on that quota. So if you get 50% of the votes, you're more likely going to, as a political party, you're going to be allocated
more seats.
50% of the seats, of the seats available. Now, of course, the challenge we have in our country is that we have constituencies. Traditionally, we have always voted on the basis of constituencies.
Yes.
If you tell people now you want to go vote for political parties, they'll be like, you want to introduce us to those guys again?
Yeah.
Because political parties in our country are not that strong.
It's individuals.
And it's much around individuals. But I think we need to make we need to take a decision that will lead us to start institutionalizing our political parties.
When you say we, Ezra, you say we need to take a decision, we need to make a decision. Who is we here?
As a country, I'm talking about as a country, because eventually changing the electoral system is a responsibility.
I understand that as a country. However, when you say we, are we talking about the people? Because then what mechanisms then for pushing of change then do people have? Because obviously it's something that needs to change. The representation of the people when it comes to an election it can be few and far between if you want to look at it and be honest about it. So if people are pushing for change, or if people are pushing for this kind of representation, then what must be done? Because I'm assuming then you're talking about the electorate, the masses of the people, then whose interests are most vested. How is this supposed to happen when we have and there's certain factors that would affect this? We have, as we've already talked about, politicians whose interests are above more about themselves more than anything else. We have a commission who unfortunately has a tainted image. We have development systems which are not in place, right? So then how will the we then clamor for any kind of change practically?
No, I mean, it's obvious to me that we already have a legal framework in place, which is the Constitution, which allows us to amend the same Constitution through a parliamentary process or through referendum. So the changes will not happen unless we have a referendum happening. So the question is, who will propose these changes? So initially I used to think that, Punguza Mzigo, when they were thinking about this, they would have come up with something that will address the electoral system. But no one has been courageous enough to come forward and say, this is the kind of electoral system that we need to have in place, and therefore making a proposal for constitutional change, collect 1 million signatures, let's have the assembly approve, and let's get this thing done for a referendum. That's the only way you're supposed to change this in our context.
If you were to go back, if you were to go back,
to IEBC,
some act
today.
of God happened, and you were to go back. Do you have any regrets? What would you change for? What would you change for any kind of different outcome?
Outcome for who, really?
Let's talk about these masses that you seem to be so concerned about at this point.
The people.
For the people.
It's always about the people.
It's about the people. It should be.
And I mean, it's about the people, but again, the things we're talking about go beyond the IEBC.
Okay.
Constitutional change is not the responsibility of IEBC. It's the responsibility of any Kenyan.
That's fine. So let's take all those things into consideration then and say, would you change anything about the way in which you
IEBC
operated?
runs.
Would you change anything about how you operated or how IEBC runs?
Of course, the lessons we learned from the last election. And from an institutional point of view, of course, a number of things we may need to look at to improve the performance of the institution. One is how we manage our stakeholders. I think is critical. I think what people do not know is very difficult to work with political parties. We had forums such as the political parties liaison committee. They never really worked, and as much as it was in law. We will have meetings, and those meetings lead to now. So we'll have to devise a strategy of how to constructively engage with the political parties. We'll have to devise a strategy that will enable us to have a better relationship with other players like the judiciary. But most importantly, I think from an operational point of view, because if you look at the nullification of the presidential election, it was based on the form and not on the substance of the election. So how do we improve our processes to ensure that we get things right, or we design systems that everyone else understands what we are doing? So what happened in 2017, I think there was a lot of faith in the technology, which very few people understood, and that kind of clouded the entire process.
Yeah.
But
sure, because it made it seem as if then nobody knew what they were doing, and people are still asking for the service to be opened. How are we getting data that is typographical out of a database, for crying out loud? So of course, and those questions or that mistrust is actually very it's valuable at this point, I think.
I mean, it's because maybe the commission has not come out proactively to say these are the things that we observed, and this is how we want to improve. And also, I don't think the commission has been consistent with the position that it wants to hold on some of those things. For me, my view has been consistent throughout in terms of what I thought happened in the election, and in terms of what needs to be worked on. So I think it's high time that the commission will say, hey, these are the lessons learned. The mistakes that were made were this, and this is how we've improved on, and we intend to improve. And even these improvements, as much as we make them, there are certain limitations. I think there was overpromise of using IT in the election, and without emphasizing the limitation. And anytime we try to de-emphasize the use of technology in election, then you became anti-reform and progressive.
Yeah.
And I think this is the time now to talk about the reality around the use of technology in election. Commission plays that critical role in doing just that.
Ezra Chiloba, Kitale farmer, thank you very much for speaking to us.
Yeah, this is a place to be. And once in a while, you have to take a break. Come to Kitale. It's a beautiful place.
Asante sana. Have a good one. And stay safe.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Karibu.